Material elements in the Presocratics. This is still part of our attempt to comment on Aristotle's Metaphysics. If we turn next to the Presocratics, we find in the few surviving fragments of their writings a wide variety of proposals concerning the metaphysics of change. Some of the Presocratics were early scientific thinkers who sought to explain natural phenomena in terms of a single underlying principle. The desire to reduce the complexity of the world to a simple set of basic laws remains one of the most important driving forces in science and philosophy even today. It is amusing from a contemporary standpoint to see that some of the pre-Socratic solutions to the problem of change try to reduce the complexity of experientiable phenomena to so few and such overly simplified principles as to seem implausible. Thales of Miletus, for example, taught that all things are water. Anaximenes maintained that all things are air. Heraclitus of Ephesus, who emphasized the possibility of change, believed in the Logos. If it is true, in some sense, that all physical things really are any of the elements, water, say, as Thales would have it, then whatever scientific and philosophical explanatory problems such a theory might entail, the approach at least helps to account for how the same things are capable of undergoing change, preserving their identity throughout the process. Things can change despite remaining the same, according to some of the pre-Socratics, because everything is ultimately made of a singular matter or principle. We know from everyday experience that water persists through drastic changes of state when it is converted from one physical form to another, changing from ice to liquid to steam and then back again. It might be that Thales had these kinds of facts in mind in actually arguing that the Stoicheon is water. Similarly, though, with respect to the other pre-Socratic hypotheses about the physical world, Empedocles, as Aristotle recounts, combined several of the material first principles of other pre-Socratics, explaining all physical change in terms of fire, water, and air, apparently in an effort to capitalize on the advantages of all three of these elements while avoiding the explanatory limitations of relying on any single one. Aristotle expresses greater interest in theories involving such combinations of elements that in explanations involving only elements such as water, fire, or air considered individually, although he also does not accept any of the combinations of elements in their original formulations. He nevertheless devotes more attention to pre-Socratic thinkers who tried to explain the nature of substance in concrete physical terms, in contrast with Plato's theory of forms, and the Pythagorean references to numbers as abstract mathematical entities. Aristotle lumps together many of the Presocratics who tried to explain the identity, individuation, and change of physical things in the physical world. In an important passage, he contrasts Plato's solution involving forms and numbers with matter and material elements as the opposite theory. Let's read this section from 988a. And yet we have this much from them, that of those that have spoken of the principles and causes, none has mentioned any beyond those that are defined by us in the physics. But rather all seems to be indistinctly grappling after these. For some of them give the principle as matter, differing as to whether there is one or many, and as to whether this is bodily or not bodily. For instance, Plato gives the large and the small, the Italians the unlimited, Empedocles fire, earth, and water, Anaxagoras the infinity of homoimetries. All these thinkers are fumbling for this sort of cause, and also those who posit air or fire or water or something that is thicker than fire but lighter than air. For in fact, some thinkers have asserted that some such thing is a primary element. Aristotle accepts the existence of the material elements, earth, air, fire, and water, so important to the materialist Presocratics, to which he adds the further element of ether as the material stuff of stars and planets and other heavenly bodies. He interprets the elements as vital to an explanation of changing physical phenomena, but not yet the most ultimate substance of the experientiable realm of the senses, and as such, not yet among the basic principles of a sufficiently general first philosophy. There is, in Aristotle's Metaphysics, a more basic type of matter, which he calls prime matter, prote hyle. Prime matter is pure and differentiated physical stuff that underlies all physical entities, including the five elements, at their deepest level of material constitution. There is some reason to think that Aristotle might have derived this idea of prime matter from another Presocratic philosopher, Anaxagoras, who put forth the idea of the indeterminate, the aperon, that can become anything if, like a piece of clay, it is properly shaped. Aristotle seems to regard the other Presocratics as having confused four of the elements as the ultimate material principles of the changing world. He believes, on the contrary, that prime matter is the most fundamental material stuff from which the five elements are constituted. Aside from the conclusions Aristotle later draws concerning the nature of matter, he criticizes the pre-Socratic reliance on concepts of particular experientiable material elements in order to explain the phenomenon of change and the persistence of physical things undergoing change. He faults them for making a very different mistake from that of Plato and the Pythagoreans. Whereas the theory of abstract forms or numbers does not seem to account for the individuality of distinct material objects, Aristotle complains that the pre-Socratic materialism of Thales, Anaximenes, and Empedocles, leaving Anaxagoras and the concept of the aperon out of the picture for the moment,
are unable to explain satisfactorily the metaphysics of abstract entities. Aristotle designates these as incorporeals, in effect something like the Platonic forms, which he does not recognize as such, but for which he again offers his own revised doctrine of definitions or secondary substances. The implication, if Aristotle's critique is correct, is that while the Platonists and Pythagoreans did not do justice to the metaphysics of corporeal or material things, the more materialistically minded Presocratics equally failed to explain the metaphysics of incorporeal or qualifiedly abstract things. Aristotle will observe, and we have it here in front of us, of those then who assert that the universe is one and a single nature, and that this is bodily and has magnitude, it is clear that they are wrong in many respects. For it is only of bodies that they posit the elements and not of the unbodily things. And when they try to give the causes for generation and destruction and give a comprehensive physical account, they miss the cause of movement. And also by their failure to posit substance as the cause of anything, nor the essence, and further by their easily giving as the principle of simple bodies anything rather than earth, not considering how they will bring about mutual generation, I mean of fire and water and earth and air. Without elaborating on his reasons, Aristotle also finds it unsatisfactory that the Presocratics he mentions did not theorize about substance generally or the specific types of material substance that each of the Presocratic thinkers in this category individually championed as causes, formal principles, or the very essence of things. Aristotle regards this omission as a failure on the part of the early Presocratics, although in this place he does not try to say why. A more thorough examination of his first philosophy is needed in order to understand what Aristotle considers objectionable about the Presocratics overlooking this further step in trying to explain the metaphysics of change. Aristotle discovers other inadequacies in the pre-Socratic reliance on physical elements as explanatory principles for complete and correct first philosophical inquiry. He continues, and we read here, for these come about by combination or discrimination from each other, and this is very different from their being prior or posterior. For in a way, the most elementary thing for all things might seem to be that from which they come first, by combination. And this would be the smallest part and lightest of the bodies. Hence, all those who posit fire as a principle would be speaking specially in conformity with this line of reasoning. And each of the others also agrees such a thing to be an element of bodies. A more satisfactory analysis of the concept of material substance than that offered by the pre-Socratics, Aristotle believes, would need to delve more deeply into the conditions for the generation of all material elements. Aristotle remarks on the anomaly that none of the pre-Socratics proposes earth as a basic element by which all other elements and all physical entities are produced and may be individuated, so that their changes might be traced through space and time as they are transformed in various ways. Aristotle argues that if anything, earth ought to be regarded as more basic than fire, water, and air from the standpoint of how some of the elements might be produced from the others. He says, by combination. Apparently, the reason is that Earth is less dense in internal structure and composition than the other elements, which can therefore be made from it by compacting its material substances in such a way as to produce water, fire, and air. It seems strange to regard air and fire as more dense than Earth. If we are meant to think of these material substances in anything like the form in which we typically encounter them, Aristotle nevertheless singles out fire in particular for criticism as he preferred as a preferred basic element among the Presocratics, contrary to which he maintains they should instead prefer earth. A confident interpretation is difficult because we do not know exactly what Aristotle or the Presocratics meant by the concept of a material element, or in exactly what sense they spoke of water, fire, earth, and air as basic material principles underlying the world of change. It is worth noting that Aristotle rejects their materialist solutions to the problems of change as thoroughly as he rejects Plato's and Pythagoras' formalist numerical solution. As a rather different pre-Socratic approach for which Aristotle has more sympathy, we should now say something more about Anaxagoras, who believed that all things are what he calls the aperon. Without peron is boundary, unbounded. Pericardium is the covering of the heart, for example. So peron, no? Aperon, therefore, is that which is unbounded, or that which is less formally known as the infinite. The concept of the indeterminate, the aperon, is a way of describing the potentiality of physical stuff to be configured and reconfigured in an unlimited number of ways. On such a theory, physical things change while in another sense remaining the same because at bottom they are all composed of some kind of determination being imposed on the indeterminate as an underlying undifferentiated something. This is a more difficult concept than that of the other concepts of potentiality or other concepts of the pre-Socratics. This is a concept of potentiality understood as vitally important in understanding natural phenomena and especially in explaining the changes and the persistence of identical things through change. Aristotle, despite his greater sympathy for Anaxagoras' concept, is unprepared to accept the indeterminate in its original mystical formulation. He revises the concept in his own way to fit in with the decidedly more scientific principles of his philosophy. The final pre-Socratic thinker whose ideas should be considered in this context is Democritus of Abdera. Democritus, as a materialist philosopher, is the extreme opposite of Plato's formalism. Unlike the other materialists we have mentioned, Democritus does not commit himself to the existence of any particular element, but develops an atomic theory of physical matter according to which all physical things are composed of tiny atoms. The atoms are too small to see, inelastic, impenetrable, and capable of combining with other atoms in unlimitedly many different ways to compose the wide array of physical objects we perceive. The materialist answer to the question how sensible things can undergo change while yet remaining the same in Democritus's philosophy is that the ultimate material constitutions of these physical entities are composed of atoms in different configurations, and that change occurs when the atoms in an object are lost or change their positions in the internal configuration to which they belong, or when other atoms are added to a given configuration. The possibility of change and the persistence of perceivable things through change is accounted for in Democritus's atomistic theory in terms of arrangements and rearrangements of atoms, provided that at least some of the original atoms in a thing are preserved from the moment to moment through each phase of change. We might imagine a common core of atoms staying the course as others are shed, added, or transposed when physical entities undergo change. If all of the original atoms are eventually lost, we might still think of the same object surviving through even the most drastic change, unless, of course, it is completely destroyed by virtue of an overlap of shared collections of atoms successively reconfigured over time or persisting distributively as a scattered object. Although Aristotle does not mention Democritus by name in this part of the Metaphysics, it is evident that he knew of Democritus's many writings. In considering materialist solutions to the problem of change and the identity of bodies or material entities through change, Aristotle probably means to include Democritus along with the other Presocratics. The comparison of theories in Aristotle's survey of previous solutions to the problem of change opposes the formalism of Plato and Pythagoras with the materialism of the Presocratics, especially Thales, Anaximenes, Empedocles, and Democritus. Aristotle believes that they all have worthwhile, if ultimately incorrect things to say about the problem of understanding change and identity through change. He further believes, when he is done, that he will have improved on their solutions, adapting the best of their ideas and developing them in his own way. If the latter materialist did not arrive at exactly the right answers, Aristotle seems to believe that they were at least proceeding in a more correct direction than the formalists. By critically examining the views of formalists and materialists, Aristotle sets the stage for a synthesis of their respective solutions, the combination that combines in the right way considerations of form and considerations of matter in a theory of substance. If you like this data, please click like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Samo't Sari sa Simula. Thank you very much.